It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Norman Wolfe, founder and CEO of Quantum Leaders. With over 4 decades of work experience in various organizations from Fortune 500 to technology startups, Norman views each experience as something that can uncover new possibilities for growth and development. In his book, The Living Organization, he focuses on the process of flawless execution and highlights why a deeply held purpose, efficient business processes, enhanced talents, energy, and maturity of people are keys to business and personal success. Quantum Leaders help CEOs determine the critical issues blocking flawless execution, bringing their senior executive team to new standards of performance just by using the living organization model for success. Norman has his Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from NYU and resides in Vancouver, Washington. Norman Wolfe, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brad. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where does the podcast find you today?
I'm in Portland, well, actually Vancouver, Washington, not to be confused with Vancouver, BC. I'm across the river from Portland, Oregon.
And fall's starting to edge in already, or are you getting days in summer?
Yeah, it's beginning to get a little rainy and overcast today. It's supposed to go back to sunny, mild weather, but that's typical for the Pacific Northwest.
Well, I know with that accent, that's not the place you grew up. So we're going to start with that. Tell us a little bit about your early years, Norman, where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Yeah, thank you. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, kind of a middle class, working class Jewish family. My dad was, I guess in many ways you'd call him an entrepreneur. He had to quit high school at the age of 16, and he started working. Ended up with his brother having a little sewing shop in the garment district in Manhattan, he was had his own little company. My mom was legally blind, so she didn't start working until I was about 13 or 14. Then she went back and got certified as a medical transcriber and worked for the city of New York as a medical transcriber for the hospitals. I have one older brother and one older sister. My sister's the oldest, then my brother, and then me. So I'm, as they say, the baby of the family. Right. I grew up in a rather, there was only on one hand 3 of us, but we had a very big extended family. My mom was one of 5 children, and all of the aunts and uncles lived in the same neighborhood, except for one that lived in Washington, D.C. So there were 12 first cousins that grew up like brothers and sisters.
Wow.
So it was that type of...
in an Orthodox community?
I would say more... my grandparents were Orthodox, and the temple we went to was an Orthodox temple. Eastern European, they all spoke Yiddish. I understood not one word of the sermons. But yeah, I was raised in a typical middle-class Jewish family. both my grandparents and my mom were evicted from Russia during the pogroms, so that kind of sets a stage for some of the experiences I had as a young man, as a boy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and went to well,
They came to join family in the New York area. Is that what brought them to Brooklyn?
think so. They left Russia, went to Israel, or at that time the Sinai Peninsula. Um, my grandmother and my mom, I think one other child, one of my aunts was stayed there. My grandfather came over, established himself. Uh, Kind of like any immigrant, did what he could.
Yeah.
Um, he was a painter, carpenter, and then he opened up a butcher shop. So I knew him as a butcher shop who had his butcher shop was around the corner. I passed it every morning on the way to school. Eventually, he brought his wife and my mother and uh, raised a family here in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
My grandmother's sister lived around the corner, so we had, God, I don't know how many. The cousins club gathering was like 30, 40 people.
It sounds like a great community, lots of family
Yeah,
interaction.
lots of family
What
around.
were some of the fondest memories you have from those early days, Norman?
Uh, the family gatherings, the cousins club, everyone would come over, they'd play mahjong, the men would play poker, the kids would all play together, various games, the holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Passover especially, the family would get together. Um, Walking to school, for some reason, the thoughts of walking to school with my brother and my sister, stopping off at the bakery, stopping at my grandfather's butcher shop, stopping at the little pharmacy that had a soda fountain, getting an egg cream. Those are some of the memories. Um, I think also the memory of just playing in the streets of Brooklyn, stoop ball and stickball and punch ball and those kinds of things.
Did
Yeah,
you go to public school? Were you in Hebrew
yes.
school?
I
Combination?
went to PS 164,
Yeah. Yeah.
and for high school I went to Brooklyn Tech. Uh, there were three kind of special high schools. I think you'd probably call them magnet schools these days. Um, they were all let's see. There was the Brooklyn Tech, which was originally was a school to train people who wanted to be technicians. So there were programs like electrical engineering technician, aeronautical engineering technicians. By the time I went there, it evolved to um, uh, preparatory school for college. So you still took the um, technical courses, but you also had all your math and science and English and literature and all the courses necessary for college entrance. Uh,
Were you a
the
good student, Norman? Did you enjoy school?
Yeah, I was. Most of my upbringing focused on studies. I mean, we come home from school, and I remember I tell my dad, I got 98 on my test, and he gets, wow, that's great. What about the other 2 points?
I had a dad like that too. I know exactly what you mean.
Or I come home and I say, Dad, I got 100. He says, don't they give extra credit?
Well, something about getting that early stretch, right?
Yeah, and in many ways it did. It was a little annoying because, of course, I wanted more acknowledgement, but it was also stimulating because it drove me to want to constantly perform. And studies and education is an important thing in my family.
Yeah, yeah. What about entrepreneurial activities? It sounds like, dad was a bit of
Well,
one.
yeah, I mean, I didn't realize it growing up, but as I got into business, especially when I went out on my own in 1988, um, I realized my dad had set an amazing model for me. Not only did he have his own business, and I grew up with that. I mean, I grew up counting out the pay that went into the pay envelopes, counted out the quarters and nickels and dollars that would make up somebody's pay. And so I really had that kind of the responsibility of running a company and taking care of other people was a real big model. My dad was very, very, in today's world, you'd say people-centric, very caring of his employees, did his best to take care of them all the time. The other major thing that happened that had a big impact on me when I was about 15 or 16, my dad actually had to liquidate his business. He had to declare bankruptcy. The industry outsourced, not to China or Vietnam, but to North Carolina, Appalachian region. The sewing industry moved down there. And so when people talk about the problems of outsourcing to other countries, I go, hey, listen, people have been going to cheap labor for years, and it doesn't matter whether it's outside the country or even inside the country, it still has the same impact. So, and I watched my father, who didn't ever have a high school education, start all over from scratch.
Wow.
Got his GED, started to take some classes in college, started to learn about computers. Started over as a bookkeeper, a humble bookkeeper, and ended up working his way to heading the payroll, and then into when they automated, he took over the computers and retired as head of the finance department, you might say, the IT department and all of that.
Really reinvented himself.
Yeah, and it gave me that sense of no matter what happens, there's always a future opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. You went on to NYU. Was it clear that you go to college? Did your older
Oh
siblings?
yeah. It was my sister went to, even at the age where women went to college to get a Mrs. degree, find a husband. My sister went to Queens College. My brother went to City College. My brother ended up getting his PhD in physics. I graduated from NYU. I ended up going to NYU on a fencing scholarship. I was really blessed to at Brooklyn Tech. I was on the fencing team and
Oh,
didn't really have the grades to get a scholarship, but at an Ivy League college. But the fencing prowess that I had
where did you
got me
learn
into
fencing?
NYU.
Where did you learn fencing?
What was that?
Oh, where did you learn fencing, Norman?
At Brooklyn Tech High School. It's
Brooklyn.
an interesting story. A friend of mine and I were looking for the coach of the gun club, and we were walking down the hall, and there were kids lined up learning the basic moves, um, and so we decided to line up with them, and the coach looked at us and said, "You boys must have been practicing real hard over the last few weeks." We didn't realize they'd been studying for, or practicing or being taught for about 2, 3 weeks before we joined them. And so we looked at each other and said, well, let's keep trying this. Anyway, we both ended up making the cut and being part of the team and doing fairly well.
That's great. And you
Yeah.
studied mathematics. How did you make that choice?
Well, NYU had an interesting program. I wanted to be a aeronautical engineer. Actually, my life was I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. And I had a cousin, I consider him an uncle. He was a pilot, flew in Vietnam and all of that. And he gave me his wings for my bar mitzvah. That was his
Mhm.
gift to me. And
Nice.
so, I really wanted to be, kind of following his footsteps and be a fighter pilot. Um, but, um, and I was actually applying to the Air Force Academy. That was my first wish. But I had vision problems starting around 16, 17. And I could still go to the Air Force Academy, but at that time I couldn't be a pilot. I could be a navigator, I could be a logistics officer, I could be a lot of things, but never a pilot. So I decided instead of going to the Air Force Academy, I'd become an aeronautical engineer. And so that's what got me to, that was the program I was looking for. And NYU had an interesting 5-year program, 3 years at the Liberal Arts College. Now, the Liberal Arts College, the downtown campus, was where the fencing team was. So by getting the scholarship, what I did was I entered their 5-year program, 3 years in the liberal arts college where I can take either math, chemistry, or physics, get a degree in that, and then go for 2 years into the engineering school, which was in the Bronx, um, and finish out my engineering degree. After the 4th year, I had my Bachelor of Arts degree, and I was tired of university. I wanted to get out and work, so I left. And I started to interview for jobs, and ended up with the job at Pratt& and Whitney Aircraft.
Yeah. So tell us about that. Pratt and Whitney was, gosh, great, big company at that stage. I know they had manufacturing facilities, down in Florida where I live. They,
Yep.
big plant down there. I think it's been weaned away as they've continued to, kind of be acquired by elsewhere. But what made you choose Pratt and Whitney for your first job?
I chose Pratt& and Whitney primarily because uh, all the other aeronautical companies I applied to, Lockheed, Martin Marietta, Douglas, because I was an engineer, I wanted to be an engineer, and I was in the math department. I decided to take some computer classes because I kind of figured the slide rule was someday going to be obsolete and I should learn about computers. Well, because I had computer programming classes at university, they all wanted to put me into a computer group. And I wanted to be an engineer. I didn't want to be a computer guy. That was just a tool from my perspective, not a profession. Of course, this was long before computer science became a thing. So Pratt and Whitney offered me a job as an analytical engineer. I go, wow, that sounds more like it. So I joined Pratt and Whitney. I accepted their offer. It was also closer. It made the transition from home to work on my own a little easier. I wasn't going to Chicago or California at that time. So, and I was also just engaged, so that also, made the choice to Connecticut a lot easier.
Sure.
And although when I got there and I was assigned to a group, met my boss and found out I was in a data crunching business, analyzing test stand data using computers. So here I am in a computer group. I actually was really upset and was going to leave, but I didn't really have much choices because at that time we had Vietnam War. The draft was just being launched. I mean, the lottery for the draft was just being launched. And I ended up with lottery number 8. So it was
Ooh.
either go to Vietnam, go to Canada, go to jail, or stay at Pratt& and Whitney.
You made the right choice.
I think I made the right choice.
Did you start managing people fairly early on?
No, I didn't start managing people until I got to HP. So I
Yeah.
was with Pratt& and Whitney for 4 years. Um, because we were doing test stand data acquisition, we were using HP equipment for that. And that got me known at HP for the kind of creative work I was doing with their equipment. And one snowy, cold Connecticut winter, our support guy from Steve, who was our support guy, who got a promotion and moved to California, came to visit. And I said to him at lunch, "Hey, Steve, do you got any jobs on the West Coast? This snow stinks." And he said, "Actually, I might." Well, he turns out he didn't. He filled his position internally, but he did put me in touch with 2 other people, one in Atlanta and one in Fullerton in the sales regions. And I decided, I think I had enough of the East Coast. Maybe it's time to see the West Coast. So I took the one in Southern California, and that's where I started with
That's what
HP.
brought you there. Yeah,
Yeah.
got it. And then you lead a sales team at that stage?
I was a systems engineer for them. So at the sales region, the systems engineers were salespeople in training, and the way we were trained was to learn the technical aspects of our equipment. support the salespeople, carry the bag for them, so to speak.
Yeah.
It was sort of an apprentice training for most of us. A few of us saw the systems engineering field as a path, as a profession unto itself, who didn't want to be a salesman necessarily. Eventually, the systems engineering organization was born um, for those who wanted to stay as systems engineers and not necessarily move into the sales position. But mostly it was supporting the salespeople in configuring the right systems, understanding the technology, and then supporting the customers when they had problems using the equipment or how to apply it or stuff like that. So, and also to do the trainings, we did all the customer training for them. So that's how I started. I was actually because of my experience, I was actually the regional systems engineer. So I supported all the other systems engineers.
Nice.
And always dealt with the most difficult customer situations. That was the one
When you
they
spent
called.
about 15, 16 years there, were you in Southern California the whole time, or did you
Yep.
spend time up in
Yeah,
there?
I was always in the sales region.
Yeah.
And so my first management job, which is kind of interesting, they invited me to be a district service manager. And what was interesting about that was that I had no knowledge of how to repair equipment.
Hmm.
And they didn't, upper management didn't seem to care. They wanted my customer relationship skills to infuse into the service department. And so I decided, sure, I'll take that. That sounds good. I wanted to get into management, so I became a district service manager. Quite a challenging situation. My first year, when I got my first year's performance review, sat down with my boss, and I knew I was struggling. There was a lot of things about management and leadership. I had this naive notion that if I cared about the people, and I truly cared about people, that was kind of my orientation. I guess going back to my dad, how he cared for his employees, that everything would take care of itself.
Hmm.
Well, it's not really quite that simple.
Right.
And so I knew I was struggling. Plus, the service business was actually a P&L center. I never ran a P&L process before. There wasn't, other than helping my dad count, the employee salary at the end of each week. I had no idea about P&L statements or accounting or any of that stuff. I remember I was struggling with it one year, and went to my boss. He wasn't the greatest coach, and I said to him, I don't really understand this. He said, it's simple. It's like balancing a checkbook. And I said, what makes you think I balance my checkbook? So it was a real struggle my first year, but I didn't think I was awful. Well, when I sat down to get my performance review, he rated me unacceptable in every category.
Wow.
And so, needless to say, I was feeling a bit defeated, going from one of the top systems engineers recognized by, John Young even knew who I was because of a meeting and a very difficult customer situation that I helped navigate our way through. And so
And John Young was the CEO at the
he was
time.
the CEO of
Yeah.
HP at the
Yeah.
time,
Right.
yes. The first CEO after Dave and Bill
After,
started their
yeah. Right.
retirement.
H&P moved on. Yeah.
And so I figured, okay, well, maybe management isn't for me, and I was going to go back to the technical world, maybe go back to sales again. And my mentors my management and mentors within the company strongly advised that I stick with it. That they saw something in me that I guess I didn't see, and they said, yeah, you had trouble the first year. There was a lot of issues showed up, but you're getting a handle on it. Stick with it. You'll be one of our better leaders. So I did, and I was. I became one of the top leaders in the sales regions.
Stayed there for a while. And then I think entrepreneurial things kind of took a hold of you from that point on, because I think Quantum Leaders was founded about the same time you left.
1988. One of the things they asked me to do. So after district service manager, I became area service manager and then region admin manager. And again, I took over another poor performing organization and had to turn it around, and I did quite successfully. Um, and we were beginning to change a lot of the dynamics within HP. The region was changing they created a field business operation for the US and Europe and Asia. And so they began to sort of start to consolidate some of the region functions, and the regions started to become less standalone significant. So the whole region operations was kind of being revisited, and they asked me to do a whole redesign of the admin organization. When I'm doing that, I actually eliminated my job in the new organization. And I figured that was no big deal. I've always had jobs within HP. I had a lot of recognition. I could easily move on to something else. But when they said, okay, great job, we accept it, your job is ending, time for you to look for another job or leave, that or leave kind of shook me for a while. But then it also was a seed of maybe it is time I leave. Maybe it's time I go do something else and leave the corporate world. And that's when I began to realize, I spent my whole life in the corporate world. It was like living in the security of the big corporate mothership. But I guess my father's influence really was buried deep inside there, because something started to emerge saying, hey, maybe you should jump into the ocean of entrepreneurship and see if you can swim. So I did. I left HP. I had a little bit of savings that I think if I stretched it really hard, I can make it last 12 to 18 months. I said, let's see if I could do this on my own. And the only thing I really had was my leadership and management skill set. I was because I always ran organizations that I didn't have the technical expertise in. I couldn't rely on and do it this way because this is what made me successful. I had to really learn how to lead organizations. So I became a consultant. I became a management consultant, and
the rest, as I say, is
since
history.
1988. So,
what was, if you talk about it, think back about those foundations on which the Quantum Leaders was founded. What was your mission? What were you trying to do?
Well, in the early years, I don't think I really had a mission other than to get clients and survive.
Survive, yeah, right.
And I think a lot of entrepreneurs actually do this. They have a sense of something they want to do, but they don't really quite know really what the marketplace is going to accept. So there's a lot of experimentation in the early years. For me, the early years lasted about 8-9 years. And it was really just following opportunities that came along. I'd meet somebody, we talk. And the good thing for me about that is I got involved with a lot of different aspects. I got involved with the Turnaround Management Association, Product Development Management Association, got involved with venture capital. I got involved with mergers and acquisitions. And of course I did all the stuff, lean operations, operational improvements, business process reengineering, strategy development, strategy implementation, sales training, marketing efforts. So I got involved with just about every aspect of running a business. It was in 2001, late 2001, when I was on the board of a public company, a company that was a former client of mine, invited me to join his board. And I was talking to the CEO, and I said, why do you keep hiring me as a consultant? And why did you bring me on the board? And he said, Norman, that's easy. You help me execute faster. And that's when I actually developed my focus. That's when I knew what my
Sometimes we need people to tell us what we're good at.
Right. Exactly.
I love that.
Exactly. So that's when I really began to look at, oh yeah, that's what I've been really doing is I've been
Mm.
helping organizations more, even back to my days at HP. I was always helping organizations improve their ability to effectively execute their plans, their strategies, their goals.
Let's dive a little deeper on that, Norman. How do you do that? What do you think your key skills are, your key gifts are to help people in organizations do just that?
I wish there was a real simple answer to that, Brent. um, it's actually that question led me to writing the book. As I began to look at it, and really focus on it, one of the things I discovered was the statistics that academics and consulting firms you have done studies on for years. It shows that 70% of companies fail to achieve or execute strategy effectively or
Mm.
at all. Um, but what surprised me about that was how consistent that number was over the decades. And if you look at the amount of new management theories going back to Tom Peters, Peter Drucker, turn of the century, you got Good to Great, Jim Collins, Daniel Pink's books, um, Firms of Endearment, Conscious Capital. I mean, the wealth of knowledge about how to be an effective leader and how to execute more effectively. We're not missing what knowing what to do. So the question for me is, why aren't we doing it? I've worked with
Mm.
CEOs of all size companies, and they're not stupid people by any means. And that's what led me to look at, if it's not the people, if it's not the lack of knowing, something else is happening. And that's when I came upon the notion of the basic framework, what people call the paradigm, our belief systems, the way we see the world, and which guides the way we make decisions. Um, is 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 really the root cause of what the problem is.
Mm.
And simply put, the system of management and leadership is predicated on the model or framework that an organization is a machine to be designed by leadership, executed by people who are really nothing more than component parts of the machine.
Mm.
And if you step back and you think about how leaders make decisions, you'll see that pattern or that framework as being the guiding principles for how things are done. And so I began to realize that I didn't think that way. Going
Mm.
back to my caring for people, yeah, I started off with the notion if I really cared for the people, everything else would take care of itself. That wasn't true. It's not just the people side. There has to be a lot of elements of what you call the machine paradigm, the structures, the processes, the policies, the goals. Those are still important because they provide the framework for what people are going to focus their energies on. But execution really happens by the uh, focus of energy of the people. And so then it becomes not a machine optimization problem, but a dynamic human social system challenge. And so that through that whole process and a number of other events in my life, um, the Living Organization was born.
And Living
Um,
Organization is the name of the book, but it's also the name of your latest enterprise. So
yes.
tell us a little bit about that. It's more of a collaboration from what we understand.
Yeah, so I wrote the book, published it in 2000. It took me 5, 6 years to write it, and then I published it in 2011. I was 64 years at the time, 64 years old at the time, and I thought, I think this is kind of where I'm going to retire. Well, that little voice in our heads that say, no, you're not done yet. You still got more work to do, kept coming up. And so
Mm.
I realized what it showed me was I wrote the book and it's filled with principles, but there's a big gap between principle and application. That just giving a leader a set of principles of how to think differently doesn't help them actually implement it. So then I set out to develop tools. Actually, I didn't really set out. What happened was I'd work with clients and see where they struggled. And I said, let's use this canvas, or let's use this tool, or let's go through this workshop and help them with it, coaching them. And I said, I got to develop this skill or that skill, or teach them certain things. And so a series of workshops and tools and methodologies started to emerge, which I collected, and I put them into a comprehensive integrative system called the Living Organization System. About 2 years ago, I said, okay, I've got this, but I'm only one guy. Actually, it's me and a partner I've had for about 5 years now, 6 years. Actually, it's 7 years now. Wow. And it's just the two of us. And that's not going to reach out much. If my purpose is to help organizations worldwide really transform how they see what an organization is, how they lead an organization, and how they go about creating results, I have to expand. And so I decided that there's a lot of business models out there, from training and certification to licensing to franchising to just building a company and having employees. And none of that seemed to fit for me, because it's inconsistent with one of the theories of the living organization framework, is that we're really in ecosystems.
Right.
Ecosystems of ideally independent people who have a owner's mindset and collectively decide to want to grow or achieve the purpose of the collective. And so I said, how do I implement that as a company, as an expansion? And I came up with the notion of a community, an ecosystem community. And so now I'm in the process of recruiting other established consultants or new consultants, or like a CEO who's leaving and wants to go into coaching and mentoring and consulting with other CEOs. And so I'm building a community of TLO consultants right now. And I had recruited my first 3 back in January, and we're in the process now of, in September, doing our second cohort of 5 people. And so we're going to slowly begin to expand and hopefully promote the living organization.
Fascinating. A new career in your 7th decade.
Yeah.
Great stuff,
Yeah,
Norman.
go figure, right? People keep asking me, when are you going to retire? And I redefined retirement. Retirement isn't stopping working. Retirement is having the resources that allow you to do what you love to do.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
a friend of mine, her husband retired from being a pilot for FedEx, and what he loves to do is golf. I mean, he lives for golf. He golfs 3 or 4 times a week. That's his retirement, because he's doing what he really loves. I think if he had his way, he'd be a pro golfer.
Yeah.
For me, what I really love is helping organizations move into a new way of seeing, a new way of leading, a new way of creating results. And that's based on the living organization framework. And so what else would I do? I golf, but it's not my passion. This is my passion.
Yeah.
So I look at retirement as doing the very thing that I love to do. I have the resources to be able to do this. And so I'm retired, but not.
Sage counsel. Norman, we're just about out of time, but we always have one last question we always ask our CEO guests, and I think I know what it's going to be, but what career and life advice do you give to someone who maybe has their eyes on, their own CEO job someday, or being an entrepreneur like yourself?
There's a lot of talk about authentic leadership these days. And I think that's really a key, finding a path to find out who you truly are and living that. I think I talked about my passion is the living organization, and my friend's husband's passion is golf. Finding what we really are passionate about, which is really another way of thinking about why are we here in the first place? Why do we exist? Why do I have the opportunity to live these last 70, almost 77 years now? What did my life mean finding that and then living it regardless of what might get in your way. Stay true to that and find out how to make that happen. That I can't give anybody better advice than that.
I love it. Norman Wolfe is the founder and CEO of Quantum Leaders and the recent author of The Living Organization and starting his new career in retirement. Norman Wolfe, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. It's been a delight, and it's nice sharing my story.
Hey listeners, we're now including your questions with our CEO guests. If you'd like to send in a voice memo, send it to info@go4roi.com and we'll read it on the air to one of our future CEO guests. Thanks so much for listening and share it with friends.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.go4roi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.